Hello. Today I thought we could look at ways to use scrap fabric to make some soft wearable art jewellery pieces. So I've got about 10 different things that you can do to use up fabric scraps. And if you're anything like me, you've got a lot of fabric scraps lying around all the nooks and crannies in your home. Um, this is just a very small example of the scrap that I have lying around my home. I like to try and use as much of my scraps as possible, and even the smaller scraps, if I can use it to stuff things or as a way to pad out soft sculpture and things like that, I'll try and use it. But it does get really overwhelming at times, and I try and keep it organized and sorted, but sometimes it just doesn't work very well. But I'll just show you some of these ideas that I have to use your fabric scraps. So this little array of items include 5 different types of earrings and about 4 different ways to make a bangle or a wrist cuff, and also some rings, so things that you can wear on your fingers. So the first earrings are these little soft sculpture earrings, and they start off as a rough sketch in a book, and I just do a rough sketch of the animal or the flower or whatever I'm trying to do, to give me a rough idea of this outline that I will need to make kind of like a soft pillow. So this is just an example of a circle that I had done, but it's a very softly filled little pillow, roughly in the shape. And then I just get embroidery thread and I just freestyle onto my padded little pillow the outline of whatever it is that I'm making. So with this one, it's a chicken, so I'll just roughly just stitch the outline of the chicken in the color that I want, so the off-white color I used here. And then I just fill in the rest of, like I'm coloring in, fill in the rest of the shape as if I'm coloring in with my thread. And this one is a fairly simple, just off-white color on a dark blue, and then the red feet, and there's a little bit of brown stitching in the background. It's always a pretty good idea to stitch the whole surface, because that will then give it a thin texture. Otherwise you'll have bits that are more puffy like a pillow and it doesn't quite look finished. So they're my 2 chickens. So you can see that I've also done a mirror image. They're both not exactly the same because I just freehand stitched them rather than making a template and tracing around it. I prefer my my things to look a bit different, not to look perfect. So I gave this little chook red feet and um, just the white feathers. I think she looks pretty cute. It's an easy stitching project if you want to give it a go, and use up a very tiny amount of fabric scraps. And all you need, other than your needles and embroidery thread, some earring fixings. The next ones are similar, but I've made them using offcuts of doilies or old embroidered table linen. So I had some offcuts and I've just made these into, they're pretty small earrings. I'm tending more to make bigger earrings at the moment, but I just did a little landscape on these ones. They're both slightly different in size, but with a similar design on them. And some of the original cross stitch is visible in there. So I like to kind of include the original artist, so the person who originally did the embroidery or the cross stitch on the item, to be able to be incorporated into the new design. And it's just a way for me to feel as though I'm honouring the original artist, whether it was one of my great grandmothers or great aunties or just another woman who made beautiful stitched table linen. And these are similar. I just made a little pillow and then I stitched over the top of it. That one's got a little landscape with the trees and the clouds and a sun. And I've done the same on that one, but it looks different because it was using a different part of the embroidered napkin or doily. These ones were the same. Again, different shape, slightly different shape, but the same colours in both of them. And even though you have slightly different shapes, by using the same colour embroidery and the same sort of pattern, they sort of connect together, like they go together, but they're not exactly the same. And you can see on this one here that it has the original embroidered flower on it, but this one doesn't have an original embroidered flower on it. The other thing I've done with doilies or napkins are these kind of hoop-ish earrings. And the way I did them was using the edges of a linen tablecloth or tea towel where the seam was folded over, and I generally cut those off rather than unpicking them because it takes a long time to unpick them all. And when I'm using the tablecloth or tea towel, I just cut those off, and then I use those to create the circle shape, and then I put a few stitches in that, and then I get strips of the linen about 1 centimetre wide, and then I just wrap the whole circle in the linen, and then I get my embroidery threads and sew on in a different colour. And you can see on this one I've used a red checkered kind of tea towel. This one's got some table linens with some colour in it, and one has some blue. So I just use whatever scraps I've got, and then I just add a colour. And this one's just got one colour. This is green. So I've used the green on both of these so that they're matching but not really matching. That they have similarities but they're not exactly the same. In these ones I used the double sewn many layer seam of denim jeans, where it might run down the side seam or something where they've put 2 stitches. It's very, very thick and it's very difficult when using denim for patchworking, but I cut those seams off and then I make the hoop sort of shape out of them, and then I sew them together using other scraps of denim. And this one's got a little bit of embroidered linen as well. And then I just use a bit of coloured thread to embroider them. And then this one is using some copper wire that is from an old telephone wire that I stripped the plastic off and got the copper wire out. And then it's combined with the copper earring fixings. These ones are the scruffy earrings. These ones are really easy to make. They look pretty cute when you're wearing them. They're just made of lots of strips of all different types of fabric, but you could use lots of different strips of the same type of fabric if you preferred, and have a different style to these, but you could do whatever you preferred. This one is just a multicolor, and you sew all the strips onto one bit of tape, and then you just hand stitch it onto the hoop earring fixing. So they look quite cute. Now we'll move on to the bangles. So the first ones are these made out of linen doilies or napkins, sort of in the same style as the earrings, but in the same way that I made these hoop earrings. So I started with a piece of the edge of a linen tea towel, and then I rolled it around into a shape that would roughly fit over my wrist, and made it fairly firm over the widest part of my hand so that it's not too big. And then I wrap layers of strips of fabric over the top of that. So on this first one here, I've just used doilies that have been embroidered, and then I've used some orange and pink embroidery thread to stitch over the top, which matches some of the original embroidery. And there's some of the original embroidery in here, but not a lot. You can't really make out what it's meant to be. And then this one is using cotton and linen in the whiter colors, and then there's some denim and dark navy scraps of fabric that's navy and white, and I've just used pink and navy embroidery thread just to secure that all together. And then this one is just a blue and white theme, or a navy and white theme, where I started with white as the base, and then there's a blue and white embroidered doily, and there's some blue and white scraps of different print or woven type of fabric, and then I've just used the navy blue over the top of that just to keep it as a very simple color theme like navy and white. The next, I might just take these ones off and then show you the next ones, which are probably my most complicated bangles that I've made in terms of the amount of time that they took to make. So these ones are all made using embroidered doilies or linen tablecloths. And what I've done to make them is to first of all just get the scrap of fabric and to make a padded kind of tube, and then I've started to sew just to hold it into place. And then what I would do is bring it together, and then I would wrap a piece of fabric around here and hand stitch that down, and then I've got a kind of basic bangle kind of shape that's lightly padded, and it looks a bit like this one. You can see a couple of different bits of embroidery fabric napkins there. So that's the base of one of these bangles. And then I just freehand drew with my embroidery thread different patterns in different colors onto the base shape. And then it turns out it goes from this thick padded shape to a thin, more textured kind of shape. And I did a couple with a portrait, and I did a couple with a bit of a landscape theme, not a very big landscape theme. I can't even find the one with the landscape now. But you can see on these that there is the original embroidery coming through, and then there's the embroidery that I've done over the top And I've just used, I think that this portrait is the highlight of this bangle, and then there's a moon and some stars on there, and then just some other shapes. This one has just random kind of leaf shapes and some flower shapes, and then some of the original flowers on the actual embroidered doily. This one just had more of a simple kind of pattern on it using orange and pink and yellow. And then some of the detail of the original embroidery is there. And this one's a bit of a narrower bangle, just in a variety of colors. It's all just freestyle, whatever I kind of felt like stitching, I was stitching. Then I thought this one probably took 10 hours or something like that, ridiculous amount of time. It's a nice thing to do if you're making it for yourself and doing a slow stitching project. But if you were going to be making these to sell, you need to think about a quicker way of doing something that looks almost as nice. And I think the ones I've done, you can definitely tell they didn't take as long. And I've probably still got a bit more work to do on these ones, but I just was playing around with a way to make something similar that didn't take as long. So when I was creating the base bangle, I just used the kind of patchwork combination of different colors to give it a bit more interest. So less doilies as the base fabric, and some of them have got doilies in them, but others are just pieces of other scrap fabric in brighter colors. And then I've just done much less detail in the stitching over the top, and it's created these bangles that are different but quicker to make. And then I just experimented with some black scrap fabric that I had and just made some basic kind of bangles in black with white stitching. This one has a bird theme. This one has more of the flying kind of bird theme. But I was just playing around with different techniques and different ways to make a similar type of bangle. The other type of thing is the wrist cuff. So I have another video about how to make the wrist cuff. So this starts off, I make kind of like a stuffed tube with a loop on the end. You can see it's a bit like a pillow again. A lot of my soft sculpture starts off looking a bit like a pillow, and then it's all the stitching and the embroidery over the top that gives it this much thinner, more precise kind of looking piece of soft sculpture instead of a big fluffy pillow. So that's another one. I haven't got around to doing anything on it yet, but I just freestyle whatever design I'm doing on my soft sculpture. I don't draw it first or use a template or a stencil. I just do whatever comes out of from here to here and just stitch it. This one is using I think it was a linen tea towel, a red and white striped linen tea towel. And I have greyhounds that like to join me for coffee, and they have some peanut butter on toast. So there's a bit of an ode to my greyhounds and the morning routine. Okay, the last thing that I tried using these similar techniques is to make some rings using this exact same technique of making a shape like this or like that, but this time I made it, oh, that one's got a bit of thread missing, but this one I made so that they could fit onto fingers. So a little bit more fiddly to make, but not impossible. I just started with a strip of fabric that fit around my finger, stitched that together, and then covered that in another type of fabric, so any scraps of any colours that I liked. These ones are mostly scraps of old tablecloths, but some are just bits of old shirts and things, depending on the colours that I liked, and then overstitched with embroidery thread, green, pink, orange, any colours that are nice and bright, I usually try to make. Okay, there's a few ideas for you to help you use up your fabric scraps. I hope you enjoy making some cute little earrings or a bangle or some scrappy earrings. Let me know in the comments if you make something and if you'd like any other videos on how to make these things. Okay, see you next time.